Um, Last week we had a lot of questions about mortgages. So today with us we have Richard Boyd. Richard is a co-founder and director at Mortgage Finder. He has over 25 years experience in the financial services industry, and his first mortgage transaction was back in 1990. Before moving to Dubai in 2005, he worked in the UK for banks including Barclays and Woolwich, and he co-founded Mortgage Finder in 2011 after realizing there was a real need for independent mortgage advice in the UAE. Welcome, Richard.
Morning, Stuart.
Thank you for joining us today. So we're going to start with the questions. The first one is, in light of the registration trustee office making the announcement yesterday that they are opening their offices between 9 AM and 2 PM, meaning that property transfers can now take place in person with pre-arranged appointments, what impact do you think this will have on property transfers at the DLD for finance buyers in particular?
Okay, for finance buyers, there's actually going to be two transfers. Obviously, transfers where funds have already been transferred to the escrow account at the DLD, they will have to continue as per the previous instructions, and then the transfer will be concluded with a Skype meeting. Now, for new transfers, the documents for finance buyers will still have to be uploaded to the DLD. So the bank will obviously submit mortgage contracts, copies of checks, ID, etc. The Lands Department will then review these documents to make sure everything's correct, and then an appointment will be arranged with all parties to attend the trustee office. The reasoning behind this, rather than like it was in the past where everybody just attended the transfer office and you were there for 3 hours, obviously we want to see the process handled really speedily. So that's why there's an appointment made by the DLD for quick turnaround. I do expect, obviously we've got Ramadan, I've been here for a number of years in Dubai, so things do slow down. So there will be, obviously, because we've had 4 or 5 weeks of in lockdown, I do expect a backlog. So obviously people, buyers, sellers, everybody will have to be patient, and then we'll get through it over the next week or so.
Thank you, Richard. Next question is, what changes are we seeing with banks regarding their lending criteria?
Yeah, I mean, it would appear that if you're searching online for mortgages or you're speaking to your own lender, that there is an appetite for lending with all the banks, because we're seeing rates, fixed rates at 2.9% with 3 years. I mean, that's 25% less than what they were a year ago at 3.99. So on the face of it, it appears fine. But what we are seeing, certainly with some lenders, is their credit policy changing. What I mean by that is they're becoming quite restrictive on certain industry sectors. So if clients are involved in construction, aviation, transport, lawyers, etc., they are becoming restrictive and not lend or reduce the loan to values. We're also seeing some banks cap the loan amounts as well. But fortunately, that's not the case with all lenders. Certainly, there are some lenders that are very much open for business, although they may be doing more credit checks, more due diligence. They're still lending at 80 to 85%. And as I just mentioned, the mortgage products are very, very attractive with these banks as well. An example is I had a referral from a real estate agent just the beginning of this week. And part of the conversation I had was, this guy works for construction. I don't think he'd be able to get him finance. We knew straight away, because we know the credit policy of the banks, which banks we could place that client with, and 80% wasn't an issue. So it's very much, it differs from lender to lender, but that's the benefit of talking to ourselves, because we know what will work and what won't work.
Great, thank you. Next question is about overseas buyers or non-residents. Are they still buying property in the UAE? Still able to get finance?
Okay, for non-residents, we can still obtain a mortgage pre-approval, so that's not changed. So we can obviously, subject to them supplying the right documentation. So pre-approval shouldn't be an issue. We can then obviously instigate the valuation. So valuations are not a problem. Where the bottleneck will lie is with the lenders. I mean, we've got an example where the DLD is adapted to the market and we can do online transfers and it's Zoom meetings. The bottleneck is with banks, and they are not able to transact because the banks will require an individual to come to Dubai. So they'll require the buyer to come to Dubai to open a bank account, but then to sign the offer letter. So that's where we're experiencing the problem. And obviously, Emirates, obviously the aviation, maybe flights early July, obviously might be possible to get to Dubai earlier, but that's the problem. It's the clients actually having to be present here in the UAE. We are speaking to the bank's legal departments constantly because we've got clients with handovers of properties just to see what can be done.
Okay. Next question is around valuations. Are banks now able to instruct valuations and not to rely on desktops?
Yeah, very quickly, it's back to normal now. Banks are able to instruct valuations, and that's great news. And the only way we'll ever do a desktop valuation is if it's off plan. So no change there now.
Thank you. Final question, Richard. Although daytime restrictions have just been eased, have you noticed any increase in buyers' mortgage interest?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the figures just the other day, comparing obviously online inquiries for the last weekend compared to the weekend before, and it was noticeable that online inquiries were 27% up this weekend, which is quite significant. But what I found really encouraging was it was like a light switch went on Sunday. The inquiries I got from real estate agents, it was just like great. And the inquiries, there was some really, I mean, this is what Warren talked about last week. There were some really strong profiles. I mean, the inquiries I got personally, it was the client profile. These were people who had been in Dubai a number of years, several years. They've seen this cycle before and now thinking, yeah, maybe this is the time. But they also had job security. They were working in IT, obviously a different sector of the economy, but obviously these guys had job security, decent salaries, and what they were wanting to do was get a pre-approval in place now. That's what they're saying. I want a pre-approval because I want to look at buying over the next couple of months. And when I see that place, get my offer accepted, I want to move on it. So I can see some positives there.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Richard. I know you're sticking around for the Q&A at the end of the session, but I'm now going to hand back to Lynette for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Stuart and Richard. Richard, that's excellent news to hear about the increase in leads and how people want to get their pre-approvals done now before they find a property so that they're ready and they can just, put an offer in and close. That's a sign of a healthy market. So information on the mortgage is super important, obviously, as well. And I want to thank you for sharing great insights with us today. Also, as Stuart mentioned, it is important to note that the registration trustee offices are now open as of yesterday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. An appointment is needed 1 day in advance. Please note the online digital way to transfer property is still also available by DLD. Next slide, please. Now it's time for our Q&A. George and Richard will stay with us for these questions as well. Next question is for Richard. Richard, are the banks financing transfer fees as well?
Yes, there are options to finance transfer fees, and it differs. Obviously, if the purchase is below 5 million, expats can finance 80% of the DLD fee, and then 80% of the real estate fee. Now, for local nationals, they can actually finance 85% of the DLD and 85% of the real estate agency fee. Obviously, that's below 5 million, and that's for first-time buyers only. So okay. Yes, there's two banks that do that.
Thank you. Next question that we have for you is, I have a property transfer with EMBD. bank. However, the bank is not doing this process since last week, as they haven't started an online process yet. This is with the DLD, I'm assuming. So do you have any insight into that?
If they've not started the transfer process, because obviously we've just touched on this before, if they've not started, now the process will change back to actually the documents being uploaded to the DLD, then the physical transfer will take place at the lands department between 9 and 2 o'clock in the daytime. So the lender will submit all the documents, as I say, and then the DLD will advise on the appointment time. So we would hope, obviously, with some of the lenders, they haven't even, I mean, some of the lenders haven't even done transfers on the new process that was set up. So we'd hope now that they have got the access to the trustee office again, that this backlog would soon disappear.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we've had a backlog of about 5 to 6 weeks now, so I think everyone just needs to be patient. Next one is, are there any banks offering a real estate sector employee, such as a broker or a manager, a mortgage? If yes, how much is the availability?
Yeah, I mean, there are still banks that will offer real estate finance, but it is one of the sectors where the loan to value will be capped. What the lender would be looking, well, it might be capped anywhere from 50 to 60% loan to value, but also the lender would want to see a basic salary, and they'd want to see a basic salary of maybe a minimum of 10,000 dirhams a month. And we wouldn't want to see, say, they may ask for 6 months, but it's quite often 12 months bank statements. So we wouldn't want to see over that period of time 1 month where there was no salary credit or anything like that. It's got to be consistent. But yes, there is finance available.
Thank you. That's very helpful to know. I think we have some more questions for you. Yes. Are any banks doing property transfer on Okud with post handover payment plans? In which bank has to pay post handover payment plan in escrow account of developer?
Okay, well, obviously, I mean, Dubai Hills, for example, that's obviously there's a lot of handover payments there, and the banks are financing the handover payment. So once we've got the handover letter, so it's all subject to getting the handover letter. Then the banks will make obviously the final payment to the developer or whatever. What a bank won't do, though, is enter in an agreement where if the buyer wants to, as per the SPA, wants to keep the payment plan. So let's say post handover there's a payment plan, 10% at various intervals. The bank will not enter into that payment plan because the bank will want to settle whatever is outstanding with the developer at the point of transfer.